Okay. Well, welcome again, everybody, to Murmurations, a monthly conversation series by and between women artists, sponsored by Aim Higher. Aim Higher is a new nonprofit with a mission to help women artists by providing the support, opportunities, and community for their creative lives to thrive. I'm Lissa Kiernan, Aim Higher's founder, and I'm joined today by multidisciplinary artist Cory Nakasue and AIM Higher Board President and poet Kim Noriega. Uh, yeah, Cory is going to share some poetry, some astrology, and a breathing exercise. Um, After that, Kim and I will chat with her about such things as how to keep faith during uncertain times like these, how she uses astrology and magic making in her art, why she considers writing a choreographic or practice, and other fun things like that. After Cory's presentation, I'm sorry, after Kim and I's interview with Cory, we'll dive into a conversation ending with audience Q&A. So feel free to type any questions or comments you may have into the chat at any time, and we'll get to them at the end. We'll address them in the final 15-20 minutes or so. And up until that time, if you wouldn't mind, please make sure that your microphone is muted for the best possible audio. Okay, I'm going to introduce Cory, read a little bit of her very impressive and long bio. I'm going to cut it down just a little bit because she's done so many things. As I said, she is a multidisciplinary artist, my favorite kind. She is a published poet and performing arts critic whose work has appeared in places such as the New York Times, Aligned, Bomb, and Critical Correspondence. She was an associate editor producer at the Dance Enthusiast and Dance Channel TV. Her many years as a theater artist include performing, directing, and producing live and recorded work. She has worked as a dramaturg advisor with Elisabeth Motley, Rodrigo Fischer, and was co-artistic director of Spine, a multimedia performance company, for 10 years. Cory works as a physical and somatic therapist in private practice under the name Body Intelligence. She teaches tools and methodology for unique physical expression and approaches the body as site for our richest creative material. Her therapy practice dovetails seamlessly with her astrology practice, Astrology by Cory. She counsels clients and teaches modern astrology with a generous nod to ancient practices. Storytelling is a cornerstone of her astrology work, and you can read her monthly astro prompts for artists on Aim Higher's website. Finally, she recently began hosting a weekly live radio show called The Cosmic Dispatch. Cory, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited to. I was gonna say I'm excited to be here, but I'm not excited to be here in my attic. I'm excited to be seeing all of you, seeing all these new faces.
Right,
For inviting me.
my pleasure. So I think you said you're going to start us off with a little poetry.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Um. So yeah, this first one that I'm gonna read is fairly new, and it's part of this. I don't know if you can see that, and it's backwards. It's part of this small anthology called Gathering Space, curated by Aynsley Vandenbrouke, who's a writer and a movement artist. And it's a really lovely little connection. And she specifically wanted work that was about the feeling of being embodied or disembodied during the pandemic, when so many of us were having these kinds of like dissociative experiences like with ourselves and other people, especially if you weren't in a lot of physical contact with other people in 3D. So I wrote a poem and I contributed to this, and it's called Three Ways to Slip. And I'll start. A spike in the graph points between slats of meaning. The message and what gets lost in transmission slips. Off the soapy skin of a bubble, we cannot find the facts, so we do the dance. Distance is protection, and so is UV light. Lean slowly into the purple. Protect your corneas and your knees. Bend to the right of the highest figure. Squat below the horizon. Bend, squat, bend, squat, bend, squat, repeat. And then there's another section. The medium-sized window hangs 2 feet from the floor. I wish it was extra, extra large. I wish it took up the whole wall. Every day around 3 o'clock, the sun slips down into the belly of the window frame. It burns through the glass and spotlights my bed, a golden coin in a slot machine with a big payout. I am the most luxurious cat. I am the most luxurious cat body lolling. I am a cat's tongue lapping up hot dollops of crema de ambar. I put on the extra, extra, extra large sunglasses that take up my whole face. It's around 3 o'clock on a summer's day, even though it's winter. And I don't even like yellow. And then the last section. Slide your fingers along an endless pane of plastic. Pretty soon you wonder if you're touching anything at all. Feel the smooth scroll glide by glassy eyeballs inside slicks, wet sphere holes that slip like slime on a mirror. Find a briar patch, an unfinished floorboard, a sharp stubble of growth from your favorite leg or chin. Any splinter you can find to puncture your attention. Revel in the texture of confrontation. Impede yourself to feel yourself. Never be lonely again. And that's that.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you. And then I thought, is that a snappy hand, Tina? Okay, that works. So this next one, so as Lissa mentioned, I work with people's bodies. And so I have a poem specifically about one of my clients and working with their bodies. So we're still kind of in the land of the body. This is called The Myth of Susan's Symmetry. Susan is pushing 70. We are all in some way pushing 70, even. That beautiful blonde gliding in slow-mo like Bo Derek on the treadmill. The one whose symmetry Susan envies. Susan's spine has a 70-degree bend that pushes her organs to the left and turns it into a question mark that always asks, what's right? Do I look even? I tell Susan that symmetry is a myth. Perfection is boring. Scoliosis is a feature of her bones, like blonde is a feature of her follicles. I ask Susan to resist me and reach into a right foot that's hard for her to feel. And tell me something interesting. Tell me about sticking it to Hillary Clinton and her crew in the halls of Wellesley and getting away with murder in the boardroom. Please spare me your story about not fitting in and breathe into my hands. Twist against your time-honored trauma and surprise me. Susan scoffs when I swerve around her attempts at self-flagellation and sucker punches holes in my self-righteousness by questioning our relationship and my job description, which is simply to help Susan hurt less by feeling all of herself, not just the parts she prefers, and think more critically about the conditions she places on her self-acceptance. But her mind is a switchblade porcupine and her body a hairpin turn that will cut you if you get too close. And I love her. I love us and our serpentine repartee. I hate Susan's stale ideas about the gold standard of beauty, as if it's something for sale, for trade, something that fades. As Susan raises her arms to show me the flesh she detests underneath, I ask her to clasp her hands and lean into her curve. That's it. Oh, I'm watching time. It's already 5:14. This, I don't know if any of you are, I'm moving off of the body, kind of. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the musician Fiona Apple. This is just a poem, and I think she's amazing. I think she's a brilliant artist, and so it inspired a poem, and it's called "The Truth About Apples" after Fiona Apple. Oh, Fiona, I can only take you out after everyone has left the party. You are far too offensive for polite company, and I don't mean in a Courtney Love kind of way. You see, when you bleat, I just want to feel everything. Well, most people don't. Most people don't want their spinal cords tapped by desperate fingers so eager to jangle nerves. It's a party, Fiona. I won't spike the drinks with your bitter truth serum, and no one needs to take a bite out of your smart fruit to know that all Eve ever gave Adam was a core. She left him wanting more food, more knowing, more of all of the sweet and juicy fare one comes to expect from a garden party. Perhaps your serpent will swallow her own tail before she spills her luscious guts into the hungry ears of polite company. It's a party, Fiona. All tables turn, therefore you'll get yours on a night that's right for picking fights and poking fun at all the dum-dums. Until then, into the blood-soaked sleeve you go, filed somewhere between bliss and ignorance. That's it. Um, in the interest of time, I have a couple kind of astrological poems, but I'm just going to read one of them in the interest of time. And it's a short one, but it's really perfect for right now. So we just moved into Aquarius season. And I wrote this poem about 4 years ago, and it's called Your Horoscope for the Partial Lunar Eclipse in Aquarius, August 2017. This full moon is where you find your line break, your page break, where you break with something, someone, somewhere, some idea from your past, inspired by a picture you can't get out of your head. You'll know where needs breaking. It's the place that pinches. It's the place that bulges and rips your stitches. This picture that's big in all the ways you cannot be until it breaks you. And that's the end of the poetry section.
Okay, you have plenty of time, just to let you know. You can go till 5:30,
I don't
but
think I want to go till 5:30.
but I would say also that was a great poem to end on.
So yeah. So yeah, a little bit about Aquarius season, like kind of segueing into the astrology. When I teach astrology and just trying to get the feel of Aquarius, it's all the break words. So we're looking at like breakthrough, break down, break up, break away, break open. And so yeah, I was just playing with all the breaking in that Aquarius poem. So as Lissa said in the introduction, I've been writing these things called astro prompts for Aim Higher. And if you haven't been reading them, I was just going to share a little, the first part, the first chunk I do is kind of like a small, like astro weather report. And then we do the prompts. And this might spark some questions later if you have any like astrological questions. So I'm going to read about the current Aquarius season. And it's titled Outside, Inside, Boundaries. Even though the sun has moved on into Aquarius, intense activity in the sign of Capricorn creates some tension between all that we can envision and all that we are still accountable for before we can truly move on. Venus and Mercury complete their retrograde action this season and slowly begin their direct motion. Based on multiple interactions with Pluto over the past couple of months, we've been given the opportunity to feel into the depth of our desires and converse with the dead, the buried, or composted parts of ourselves. This material is rich, this dead material is rich with the nutrients to fuel the next incarnation of whatever you're trying to birth. If you've been avoiding this place, you still have time to dig. Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius. The two signs express very differently, even though they have a lot in common. They both deal with structure and are social in their orientation. They are two sides of the same boundary. Capricorn is concerned with the material inside the boundary, inside the structure or the frame. It wants to strengthen limits and make them more defined. Capricorn enforces the structure, make sure it holds. Now, Aquarius is just as concerned with the boundary, only it wants to know what's outside of the boundary. It wants to break through structures, and it wants to do so with the forms of the mind, like thinking, thought forms, intuition. Capricorn is a earth sign, so it's about materiality. So back to Aquarius. This might make Aquarius sound much more independent and even reckless than it is. But the truth is that Aquarius needs those boundaries just as much as Capricorn to understand who or what it is, and maybe even more importantly, who or what it is not. Capricorn needs societal constructs to understand its place within them, and Aquarius needs societal constructs to understand its place beyond them. The Capricorn Aquarius relationship reminds us that no matter how abrupt or seemingly out of nowhere a change seems to be, change is a long time in the making and always contains the contents of the past. Sorry, folks, there is no such thing as a truly clean break. And the faster we learn that, the more gracefully we can evolve, unfold, and yawn open into the future. And we do this by acknowledging and respecting and maybe even loving our past hurts, disappointments. Because if we don't acknowledge, they will grow heavy from the avoidance and then thereby forever restricting how far we can reach. And so that's a little cheery bit about the current time. But that's Capricorn Aquarius season.
Great, thank you. I love that change is a long time in the making.
It is. And often it feels like, when we have this like, oh, that was so out of the blue. When you look back, It was all these little incremental pieces, and then wham, and then there'll be like a tipping point or a flash point. So okay, so just before we move on to conversation, um if you need to stand up or switch your seated position just to kind of maybe feel your legs and feel your spine again, you can do that. We're going to do a very small just breathing movement thing to like drop back in case your legs went dead like mine did just a little bit. So you can stand up if you like, or sit on your chair in such a way that your spine is long and your feet are on the floor, and you can maybe even feel your sits bones. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's the two bony parts underneath the fleshy part of your butt, the very bottom of your pelvis. And see if you can just stack yourself up either on top of your feet or on top of your sits bones. If you like, you can close your eyes, just relax your shoulders. And when you feel your foundation, whether that's your feet or your sits bones, you're going to keep that length through your body. And without breaking in the spine or pelvis, you're just going to kind of rock backwards behind your feet or into your heels or behind your sits bones and rock forwards. So your spine is kind of like this plank. And you can inhale to rock back and exhale to move forward. And as you rock back and forth, just think about maybe the back of the body as representing the past or what's behind you, and the front of the body, the future or what you're leaning into. And just notice what images, words come up, maybe even sensations will come up. Things like, ooh, I like leaning to the back, or I don't like leaning to the back. I love leaning forward. I really want to curve my spine, or this is uncomfortable. I want to move my pelvis, just anything at all. But keep the rocking backwards and forwards and keep thinking, I'm reaching back and then I'm reaching forward. Inhaling back, exhaling forward. And then once you've gotten into this rocking, you're just going to very slowly and incrementally slow it down and make it a little bit smaller. So we're moving from the big extreme back and forth to a more conservative, reined in back and forth until you feel like you can arrive squarely on your feet, like right in the middle of your feet, and see if you can locate the middle of your sits bones so that you are just vertical and still and grounded in the present, aware of what it feels like to be forward, aware of what it feels like to be in the past, but putting the two together in a grounded present. And that's it. And then see what came up. I feel a little more like able to sit for another half hour. But that was it.
That felt great, Cory. Really relaxing.
Thanks.
Um, Thank you for all of your presentation. What a gift it was, and so rich and textured. Um, and definitely, I want to just talk about the poetry for at least the beat, because it should be remarked on because it's so fine. It's so interesting. It's so musical. And you perform it fantastically as well, which is a rare combination to both be a really, a poet with chops and an actor with chops. And putting the two together, boy, wow. I just really, really enjoyed your poetry presentation very, very much. And I guess that would segue nicely into the question I'm kind of dying to ask is I love what you say about writing being a highly choreographic act. I definitely felt like your poetry was so somatic, talking about the spine and the break. Um, can you share a little bit more about that statement with us?
Well, so the first like creative pursuit I had was dance. And so writing writing didn't come till a lot later. So when I'm thinking about composition, the first thing I'm thinking about is the feel in my body of movement and being able like to feel the rhythm in the the tension in my body and the release in my body. And when I then transfer that to being either writing or being on the computer or words on the page, it feels like i'm I'm using the same kind of sensation in my body to feel out, you know, how the words or a sentence or a stanza, how they bank off each other. And this is like not even like considering like the way the text is on the page, which is a whole other like visual like choreographic thing,
Mhm.
but how if I'm thinking I'm using my body as a dancer, like I have a finite amount of things to use in all of their different like arrangements and combinations. And when we're working, with any kind of writing, the same thing can be said of the alphabet and just the words we happen to know or invent. But a lot of the words that we invent come from like they're this alphabet, unless you're doing, symbols and hieroglyphs, which I know people are doing all kinds of things. But if we're
Mhm.
sticking to the English language, um, trying to mirror on the page sonically, visually, and then context wise that rhythm of tension and dynamic that I'm feeling like somatically. Did that answer?
That's a great answer.
Oh,
Thank you. Yeah, you explained it perfectly. And it brought up to mind the poet Annie Finch, who suggested that as a revision technique, dancing to your poem, like reading it out loud and dancing to your poem, and it really does work. And I think rhythm is the most important aspect of a poem, actually. If we go back to like the bards, and the troubadours. Bringing the news of the day, to the townspeople. They had to memorize those words, and using rhythm and rhyme was an important part of the memorization.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, well, thank you. That really does help me understand. I knew I loved that statement, but I wasn't sure why. So, um, well, I'm gonna kind of segue over into astrology because I think we have some Aquarians in the group who probably are curious about that. And the thing I'd like to start with is you once had a statement, I don't know if you do anymore, on your website, um, that I thought was interesting. It called astrology, I think, an environmental practice, and it said something about if you consider yourself exempt from the practice, here's what I'd like you to know. What would you like people to know about astrology, especially the skeptics?
The biggest, the biggest thing, and this is like a bit of a bee in my bonnet, because it like I get this a lot, is like just right off the bat, I don't know if I believe in astrology, or or even I definitely believe in astrology. Astrology is not a belief system. It's not a religion. I don't even really think it's a philosophy, even though I think if you go back centuries to when people, first started practicing astrology, I think it's the foundation of philosophical thought. But in and of itself, it is not any of those things. It's a tool. It's a way people use to try to figure things out. It's an observational practice. So to say that I don't believe in it, it's like, well, it's like showing someone a painting and saying, I don't believe in that, or showing someone a fork and saying, oh, I don't believe. It's like, what's there to believe in? It's just a thing. And you can use it for a lot of different other things, and you can use it in a lot of different ways. So first of all, that's not even a thing. So when people go there, what what I am hearing is that I don't believe this thing that um that I've heard of. Like usually these people have never even talked to an astrologer or have met one or know anything about it, but they know the cultural
Mm.
depiction of astrology, which is basically, the cultural depiction of astrology, popular media and stuff, is basically fortune telling.
Mm.
So when they say I don't believe in astrology, what they're basically saying, this is what I hear, is I don't believe that everything is interconnected. I don't believe that something happening in nature has anything to do with my human experience. And if that's what you believe, fine, but it's not the same as not believing in astrology. Does that
Perfect.
and that bugs me because you have people haven't even like bothered to, I don't know, read a definition written by an astrologer before they say that.
Absolutely. And your statement that, we're not nature has its own energy, its own power, and has to affect us.
Mhm.
We're living on Earth. We're living on a planet. Um,
Right.
Gravity holds us down. I don't see how it couldn't have an effect. Um, so cool. Yeah, thank you. Um, I do have one more question, but I'm going to save it for later. I want to get to Kim's really fascinating questions.
Okay.
Kim,
Yep.
welcome.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. Good.
Um, Cory, thank you. First of all, I loved hearing your poetry, really. Um, and I'm fascinated, Alyssa, by what you said about, I've never heard that about dancing my poems. I'm going to have to do that now, try that out. That's fabulous. Cory, so in preparation for this, I was listening to some of your interviews that you've done, and I heard an interview you did recently with Jay from Jay Brown Yoga, and you said something that I found so inspirational. Jay asked you how you keep faith during uncertain times, like the ones that we're currently in. And you said you don't really, that you're a big skeptic, and but that you find magic. I'm kind of paraphrasing, obviously, but you find magic in this connection that you find in various practices of like your astrology and writing. Can you talk a little bit about that magic? Because that really resonated with me, and I really feel like that will resonate with a lot of people.
I think I remember, yeah, Jay and I had a really good conversation and we laughed a lot about that. He's like, how do you keep the faith? I'm like, are you kidding? I don't have faith in anything. I'm the biggest, cynic, skeptic, doubting person that I think I know. I'm like, I'm working on that. Um, so, but as far as this magic piece,
Mhm.
just to be clear, there's the way I understand it and have studied, there's the magic that is like the pulling the rat out of the hat, which is like the illusionist's practice.
Yeah.
And then there's the magic with a CK at
Mhm.
the end, which is like the old true, if you can think of like Aleister, like Crowley type of
Mhm.
practice, like gather,
Mhm.
or this Wiccan type of practice.
Mhm.
And I think when I said magic in like kind of this offhand way, it was more of a like just a lazy word for being able to touch and experience and be moved by things that I can't quantify,
Mhm.
can't explain why they're happening or how they're happening, but they're definitely happening. And when I work with people in any kind of practice, even in my body practice and but especially in the astrology, I get to touch these magical moments, which is why I think I started doing readings
Mhm.
professionally to like infuse that into my life, because I don't know what I don't know what else to call it. I could call it something if I worked harder, but if I'm being lazy, I'm going to call it magic.
Mhm.
I don't know what else to call it when I sit down across from a complete stranger, and just because I'm looking at some symbols on a paper or on a screen, and then based on those symbols, I start describing the experience of a life, and for that person to go, oh my god, i'm I'm feeling this, I'm resonating, and then for us, me and this complete stranger, to have this deep intimate talk
Mhm.
about, and this sharing about their like really personal private experience in life. And I don't know how, like any real astrologer, any good astrologer, if you ask them, well, how does it work, they will all say, I don't know, it just works.
Mhm.
And I don't, and like our, we're just humans, our brains aren't like really that sophisticated, we don't understand, absolutely, we can't understand absolutely everything that's going
Mhm.
on, not
Exactly.
all of it even registers.
Mhm.
So going back to faith and magic,
Mhm.
when I do this practice, i get to I get to remember that I don't know everything. I'm not in control of everything. There are other things going on, and I can connect with another person in a really deep way without having to know, you know, what's your favorite this and what's your whole life history. We're talking about things that are are outside of that, that are really resonant. Like I don't have to even know what you've done for a living, but I can have an hour long conversation with you about, you know, your experiences when you're dreaming, and how that affects you when you wake up, and how that reminded you of, this underlying tension you felt as a child or whatever.
Mhm.
And that's where we're connecting. And so that that's that. But I also have those experiences in art making, and
Mhm.
I have those experiences when I'm moving with people, because it's the same type of connecting to myself, or connecting to another person, or connecting with a practice like astrology or nature. It's
Mhm.
connection. So
Cool.
that's the long, I'm giving
It's
long answers.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That really resonated with me too, of like, yeah, connecting. I mentioned when we first got on, that feels like all we have at our disposal now that we can kind of count on. Everything else feels. I'm in California. Everything else feels like an earthquake, to me right now. So, yeah. So appreciate that. That's great. Yeah. I'm going to go on to the next. I'll ask my next question for you too. A little along the same lines, but I also read something that you wrote for Bomb magazine. It's quite a ways back. It was a review of a performance you went to, and I was so struck. And in your poems that you read today as well, like Melissa commented, I was so struck by the somatic richness and sensual texture of your poems and your writing. And even in this, I'm going to read just a little bit of this, like a synesthetic quality to your writing. You wrote this in this article. It said, as I walk deeper into the darkness of my sense of hearing sharpens. I'm able to isolate individual human sounds in a symphony of locomotive clicks, hisses, and chest thumps. It's like walking through a jungle on a moonless night and mapping it through the music of human motion. I'm also being taught to listen with my skin. I just love that. And I'm curious, do you feel that that somatic quality, I mean, you've touched on this a little bit, but do you feel that somatic richness and texturing and your experience, does that come to you fairly naturally, or is that something you consciously approach in your writing from your dance experience? Can you speak to that process a little bit?
I think it's a little of both.
Mhm.
Like even like when I was like really really little, like I started dancing probably when I was like 4 or
Wow.
something, and then I got into a lot of sports. I've always been like primarily kinetic.
Mhm.
But then, through, training and all that, it just got more developed. But something that really pushed it along, didn't happen until I was like in my 30s. And then going back to what we were talking about before, it's when I started really, when I started working one-on-one with people,
Mhm.
in a physical way,
Mhm.
like something like got even more honed, because
Mhm.
I was like looking so
Mhm.
intently and trying to feel so intently and in such detail and nuance, and then I would, using language, have to describe in like such, specific ways for someone to like understand something new, or
Mhm.
paint pictures so they could have an image that was really strong to work
Mhm.
with.
Mhm.
And so yeah, natural, and then just got more and more honed.
That's fabulous. I can totally see how that would work, that like you said, natural ability, but then as you're trying to help someone who, so for myself, I am someone who is less somatically connected. Um, so I can see how trying to help me to have that experience in my body or connect with that experience in my body by describing it would help you to hone that ability. That's fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you. And I will just move into the next thing. So speaking of my own experience, I have had readings with you, astrological readings, and I have to say they are not like anything I've experienced with any other astrologer. And I grew up across the street from the astrologer, so I started that kind of young. But when I started having readings with you, I was really I found them very profound, and I found them to be more like a coaching session or an arts coaching session. And I wonder if you do a lot of readings that are kind of like that, of working with artists and writers and helping them in their artistic process. And also, how do you use astrology in your own art making and creative process? Or do you?
So what was the first part?
Do you use, do you work with a lot of writers and artists and in kind of a coaching, an artistic coaching kind of way?
Yeah. So since my background is performing arts, theater and dance, and I still work with artists, that's just like who I know. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I started getting really into poetry. And so then I met a lot of writers, and so I tend to, this is the difference. This is a little astro knowledge. This is the difference between a reading and a consultation. If you ever come across that, if you're like looking to work with astrologers, a reading is more of a like a presentation of your chart, and a consultation is more of a dialogue where we're actually going to use the astrology for the things you're specifically interested in or want to work on. And that's where the coaching thing kind of happens. And I do both depending on the person, but honestly, I prefer having the dialogue. Because then we can go into some really specific places and go deeply. So yeah, lots of artists, and they're the best to work with. But I gotta say, and this is not just because of present company, but poets are the best. Like I'm describing archetypes and situations, and poets will take that and run, and then they'll feed back to me something even more like amazing. So like the poetry is like happening right there in the session, but really all artists like this really works well for, because I think artists tend to think in this like bigger, more abstract way, and they're able to mythologize. Like a fork isn't a fork. A fork, it's a magical talisman that was discovered. Like it's all kind of it's like, and then we have this magical experience of kind of being in co-creation of these other worlds and other lenses and ways of looking at things. But yes, I work with a lot of artists, yes, in a coaching capacity, and I do bring astrology because I'm also a dramaturg, which means that I'm in the room during rehearsals as either like a directorial assistant or a choreographic assistant or a musical assistant. And I pull from a lot of these archetypes and timing techniques, and it helps the artists that I'm working with, like open up their thinking and not get locked into ways of working or ways of seeing something. And then for myself, because I'm a professional astrologer, I know the astrology that's going on all the time, and I can't like not know. And so it's just
it's all in there.
Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And
Thank
I'm
you
gonna
both.
turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you both so much. I love that conversation. Um, we're at about 7 minutes to 6, and I'm okay with going a little long if other people are. I don't know about Cory, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. I knew we were going to have a rich conversation today. We have right now, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Feel free to unmute yourself. Um, I have one question in the chat from, you were just talking about mythology, and this poet I know writes a lot about myth. Phyllis Capello is wondering how landscape comes into your practice, Cory.
Mhm.
How landscape comes in.
And feel free to elaborate on that, Phyllis.
Much
Phyllis,
of what I do is from because I live in a city, so I was just curious about, I assume you live in the country.
Well, I live in Kingston. So
yeah, Kingston's well, Phyllis knows Kingston.
A little bit, yeah, yeah. And I'm just curious because I know that Lissa lives in a beautiful part of our state, and often comments on in her poetry about it. And so I was just curious.
oh, well, definitely more so than when I was living in the city.
Mm,
Um, yeah, because I'm surrounded by trees
Mm.
and I'm not running around as much. I definitely feel a deeper connection to the natural world, and I'm more sensitive to time. And that's the big thing. So as far as landscape, I feel like I've incorporated it more into my writing since I've been here, but honestly the landscape of like time has played an even bigger role just because I feel like more expansive here
Hmm.
and things take longer. But yeah, I haven't delved too much into like the nature poems per se. I don't know if that answers your question.
yeah, thank you. I liked thinking about the timeline part of that answer.
Yeah, me too. I found that too when I moved here from Brooklyn, that things move at a slower pace, um, which allows you to savor the moments a little more. I always felt like in the city I was kind of running around, a little bit like a chicken with my head cut off, the subway, and then the job, and then home, and then dinner. Anyway, um,
Hi, Cory. Can I go, Lissa? It's
yeah.
Gail.
Hi, Gail.
Thank you, Cory, for so rich, the poetry and the astrology and your work as a healer. Just wonderful. I imagine you get this question a lot and you might be sick of it, but and I'm a deep believer in astrology and have been using it a long time, like many others on the call. And thank you for how eloquent you were about that. Can you say anything to us about astrology and the pandemic?
Mm.
And I mean that both in the largest sense, but also then when you're working with people and you're working with their charts and their stars and moons and Saturns and all that, just how does that come into the conversation now?
The pandemic?
Yeah.
How does the pandemic come into the conversation? So without getting like too technical, but for those of you who do study astrology, I mean, you know the big signatures of the past 2 years. It's Saturn, Pluto, Saturn, Uranus. So I won't, but so though for those of you who aren't studying astrology, those are there's a lot of astrology going on. This has been like big astrology the past couple years. But there were two major signatures in 2020 and in 2021 that that were the the big descriptors of the major upheavals that we've been having for the past 2 years. So that's the macro. So when I take it down to the micro and I'm working with a client, I look at those big descriptors from the macro and see how they land in the chart of the individual, and how some of those themes might translate to a more personal experience. Does that answer your question? And over the past 2 years, it has also very personally been a lot of upheaval, radical transformations, radical departures, and a lot of death, literally and figuratively, and helping people understand that experience of death in a way that is, I don't want to say the word empowering, that's not the right word, a constructive way, where, because when you're experiencing that much ending, loss, and death, literal and metaphorical, it's a lot of loss. An understanding of what loss is in a larger context is sometimes just enough to help people break out of a possible situation where they can feel incredible despair.
Thank you. Beautiful answer. Thank you, Cory.
Terrific. I think we'd all like you to be able to tell us when the pandemic is going to end. But yes, astrology can't do that much. It's not a crystal ball.
It's not a crystal ball, and it's still like the pandemic is actually not, and this is, I'm speaking from the astrological point of view, the pandemic is not the event. The pandemic was a thing that happened, that there is a pattern of happening many times throughout history. But it's what the pandemic did at this point in time, based on previous actions in the lives of individuals or the collective, that the pandemic showed us something. But so the actual thing that's happening isn't the pandemic. The pandemic held up a mirror or shined a light on the environment and all the ways that it is going through radical change. To put it diplomatically.
Right, like a symptom. The pandemic is a symptom, not the disease, or that, going back to like your earlier statement, change is a long time in the making. If I'm following you, but I want to get to, well, thank you. I want to get to another
test. That's the more of the idea I was thinking. It was the stress test that showed us where we're at.
I like that metaphor. Thank you. I have a couple more questions, or at least one from the audience. Sarah Vaugville. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for coming.
Hey.
Sarah is asking about Gaia's chart. I don't quite know what that refers to. Sorry for my ignorance, Sarah.
Are you asking about like the chart of Mother Earth?
Yeah, could there be one? I mean,
Oh,
you know,
God.
what you're talking about, like the pandemic being a symptom, makes me wonder, like, what is the deeper story for Gaia, for the Earth, Mother Earth?
So there's the form of astrology. There has not been a chart cast for Mother Earth. But there is a practice of astrology called mundane astrology, and that does not mean, you know, it's boring run-of-the-mill astrology. Mundane astrology means we're studying time, and what are the times according to the patterns of the planet. And so the planets, the solar system, and all the other things up there, depending on what you count. But for the Earth, according to mundane astrology, again, I'm trying to be diplomatic. I don't want to like be a bummer, but so the big thing we're looking at right now is this transit of the planet Uranus in the sign of Taurus, and it entered, I think, in 2018, and it's going to be there for another 4-ish years. And when we talk about things like Mother Earth and Gaia, that's what that's like it for me. So Uranus is the planet of disruption and breaking with the past, and it's the modern ruler of Aquarius. Radical new inventions, and brand new ways of doing things. The thing with Gaia is interwoven in the bigger mundane astrology story of the man-made structures that are no longer sustainable and their effects on the Earth. And with Uranus and Taurus, it looks to me, this is my opinion, my interpretation, it looks to me that collectively we're going to go down this path that I don't think is awesome. This path of we're going to try to invent ourselves out of this situation. We're going to try to science ourselves out of this situation. And by this situation, I mean the massive and abusive extraction of things from the earth that we see destroying the earth. But also the possibility, because of Uranus. So Uranus is like the mad scientist and the futuristic and the technological, and I can really see us trying to do that because that's available. But what's also available are things like radical new ways of being in community, radical new ways of farming, and inventive farming practice, which I hope it goes, you know, things go in more in that direction. But this is also the thing of, you know, Lisa mentioned that I think astrology is an environmental practice. It's about the relationship of people and their free will with the environment, which I include the nature of the cosmos. It's just it's another form of nature that is just not terrestrial. And so a lot depends. We have the time going on, the time frames, the cycles. You know, if you study sociology and history, a lot of people study cycles from, you know, the sociological perspective. But so that's one part of it, and then the other part is what people do. And so astrologically speaking, when I look at, you know, things like what's going on with the earth, I see the possibility of these two things that are really supported. And then the question is, well, what are people going to do? I hope that answered your question.
Well, I mean, it reminds us that the fate of the earth is very much intertwined with the fate of human beings.
Yes, absolutely. We are nature. Like we're not in relationship with it. We are it. And yeah.
Yeah.
Could I mention one thing? Just in talking with this, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the concept of ambiguous loss. There's an article in the New York Times Magazine this past weekend about ambiguous loss. And it's not linear the way we've looked at loss, how you grieve it, denial, so forth, to acceptance. Most of us think about, or we're taught to think about loss in a linear way. This is ambiguous loss that you know you've lost, and then losses that you don't even know you've lost. Looks at racism this way. What have you lost that you don't know you've lost? I look at it as a white woman, and not really having a relationship with a Black person until my early 20s. What did I lose? What have I lost? And how do I grieve that? How do I handle it? So it's like multi-layered. It's wonderful to think about for poetry. So I would suggest that with all these big losses that Cory is telling us about, and how these things are all connected and so forth. It's something that I've found that's grounded me.
I'm going to go read that article.
Yes.
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
We'll go for maybe 5 more minutes. It's 6:10.
Great.
We have a question from Tina Berry. Hi, Tina. Tina says, what do you think the pandemic has taught us?
Wow. That's big, Tina. I think it's taught everybody something different, something like very different. But one of the reasons I think it's so hard to answer that question is because of one of the things the pandemic did, and that is it fragmented reality. So if you ask one person, well, how did the pandemic change you, based on their reality or their sense of reality of what is happening, because we all have a very different sense of what's happening. Even people who I generally tend to agree with, when you scratch the surface because of everything that's going on, we see a lot of things very differently. So yeah, you ask one person, how did this change you? It's like, well, based on this baseline reality, this is how I've changed. And then you ask another person, it's like, wait, that's your reality? And so, wow, that's a really hard question. I don't know if it's answerable, like if there's like a thing, but maybe it's this. We don't know. It's making us question like what reality is. And so when we do come into trying to connect with other people, to really go in with no assumptions, especially now, like I don't think you can assume that you and even your friend or your neighbor are seeing the same thing right now. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Cory.
Josh just typed in some of the people where I live appear to believe they aren't having a pandemic.
See, yeah, there you go.
There's an alternate reality for you. And
Yeah.
Josh is in Florida, where
Mm.
my mom is too. I have one more question. I said I was going to save it, unless people from the audience, I'd defer to you, but I think I don't see any in the chat. When I read your astro prompts for artists this month at Aim Higher, I have to say, like, I really felt an identification with Aquarius, and I'm a Virgo with a Sagittarius rising. It made me curious, would the date of conception, which would be Aquarius for me, have any information for my astrological chart? Because it really resonated with me. I was like, oh, wait, I'm an Aquarius, right? No, you're not.
So this is another, like, if you're not into astrology, but those of you who are studying will know this. Every single sign, all 12 signs, are represented in everyone's natal chart. So let's say, you don't know a lot about astrology, but you read some horoscopes or you've heard some things and you're like, oh, Virgos, I don't like that. I don't resonate with that. That sounds just awful. Well, you know what? You have Virgo somewhere in your chart. And you have a relationship with it in some way, unless you're not conscious of it or it hasn't been cultivated. And then in that case, you would see an astrologer and they would tell you, what parts of your life are really influenced by Virgo. But that's the whole thing about that. It's, the birth chart is like a mandala. It's a whole piece. It represents the totality of everything, and we are all whole people who have a range of things, but maybe we don't experience all of it. How can you? In your whole lifetime, you're not going to experience all of your, potentials and everything. And so when you go to the astrologer and they talk about, parts of you and parts that, like, signs that you don't even think of, and then you go and you think about them and you're like, oh, I can see that now. And then all of a sudden you've discovered, like, some new part of yourself or a new way to look at yourself.
Thank you. I do know a little bit about that. I guess what I should do is look up what house Aquarius is for me. And it has nothing to do, though, with the date of conception.
Oh, that's a whole other can of worms, because there is astrology.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll save that conversation for next time, I guess. That other can of worms. This has been such a fascinating event for me. I want to thank everyone for being here, and thank Cory and Kim and all of the great questions people brought up. I hope you'll join us next month. Murmurations is the third Thursday of each month. Next month we have Holly George Warren, who wrote Janis Joplin's biography. And little known fact, she has also been retained to write Jack Kerouac's biography by his estate. So it should be really an interesting chat with Holly. But in the meantime, go get yourself over to aimhigher.org and check out Cory Nakasue's astro prompts for Aquarius season. They're fabulous. They're always fabulous. And we're so grateful to you for doing them, Cory.
Thank you. This was so lovely to see all these new faces and talk to you about, like, all the things that I love. So thank you.
Well, let's do it again soon.
All right.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Right, thank you.